think about the absolute worst supervision experience you have, like, ever had in your career. Just put yourself right back in that room for a second.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Right. Was it a supervisor just kind of walking in, barely making eye contact, and handing you this generic photocopy checklist?
Like a totally standard form.
Exactly. A list completely disconnected from the actual clients you were sweating over, disconnected from your specific clinical background, and, completely oblivious to the unique struggles you were facing that day.
Oh, I've seen it 100 times.
Right. Or maybe they just asked you to read a manual on discrete trial training, signed a form to get their billable hours, and just called it a day. Today, we're dismantling that exact problem.
We really have to, because it is a pervasive issue in our field, and frankly, it is the underlying rot that causes so much of the burnout we see.
Yeah, 100%.
And, the severe clinical errors we see every single day, we treat supervision as an administrative hurdle, like just a box to check on a monthly compliance form.
Just paperwork?
Right, exactly. But supervision is not paperwork. It is the systematic, rigorous shaping of a behavior change agent. If you fail at the supervision level, you are fundamentally failing the clients downstream.
And that is the core of our mission for this deep dive.
Oh.
We're tackling task list item I.4 from the BACB 6th edition.
It's a big one.
It is. Selecting supervision goals based on an assessment of the supervisee's skills, cultural variables, and the environment. And we aren't just going to read you the task list.
No, please don't.
We're going to extract the clinical precision and the specific exam-focused logic you need to crush the Pearson VUE exam.
Which is what everyone listening wants.
Exactly. But far more importantly, we want to help elevate your actual practice to the top 1% of clinical directors.
Absolutely.
So we're pulling from core ethical guidelines, advanced supervisory texts, and the latest mock exams to give you the blueprint.
And we really are setting a very clear elite standard right out of the gate here. Because as clinical directors, as educators, we cannot afford to approach supervision passively.
No, we really can't.
We are going to break this down using real, messy, applied behavior analysis examples. I'm talking from homes, from clinics, from schools.
The real world.
The real world, yeah. We will pinpoint the exact exam strategies you need, and we will dissect the most common clinical traps that supervisors fall into.
Because there are a lot of them.
So many. And every single concept we tear apart today is designed to force you to look at supervision through a highly rigorous behavioral lens. Because the overarching theme today, the concept you really need to burn into your brain, is that supervision IS behavior analysis.
I love that. Supervision IS behavior analysis.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics of this. The foundation of task list item I.4 is what we're going to call a triad of goal selection.
The triad, right.
It mandates 3 very specific components that must dictate how you select goals for your trainees. Because you don't get to guess what your supervisee needs. You just don't get to assume.
Assumptions are, without a doubt, the enemy of good clinical practice.
Spot on.
So the first pillar of this triad is the skills assessment. And just think about how we treat our clients.
Right.
You would never, under any circumstances, write a complex behavior intervention plan for a client without first conducting a functional behavior assessment.
Or taking expensive baseline data. Never.
Exactly. It would be considered clinical malpractice. Yet somehow, supervisors do this to their adult learners constantly.
It's wild.
You cannot write supervision goals without objectively assessing the supervisee's current actual repertoire.
It really is wild how we just, abandon our own science the second we start talking to another adult.
You really do.
But how do we actually get that baseline data? Because I remember looking at a specific mock question from our sources, mock 2, question 114, and the entire premise was about the difference between a supervisee talking about a skill and actually applying it.
That is the crucial distinction right there.
Yeah.
Because the most reliable data collection method here is direct observation in the natural environment. We refer to this clinically as an in situ assessment.
In situ. Got it.
You have to watch them do the job. Now, you might supplement that maybe with self-assessment checklists or by reviewing recorded samples of their work, but the source material is explicitly clear on this. You must observe what they do.
Not just what they say they can do.
Right, because I have had supervisees who can quote the White Book, the Cooper text, chapter and verse.
Oh, me too. The theory masters.
Exactly. They can define behavioral skills training flawlessly in a one-on-one meeting, but then you put them in a room with a client engaging in severe aggression and they completely freeze.
Total deer in headlights.
Yeah. If I only interviewed them, my goal for them would be entirely wrong.
Because talking about a skill is under the stimulus control of the interview room, while applying the skill is under the stimulus control of the chaotic clinic floor.
Perfectly said.
Two completely different environments, two completely different behaviors, which actually bridges us perfectly to the second pillar, cultural variables.
This is a huge one.
It is, and it ties directly into the ethics code for behavior analysts, specifically codes 1.07 and 4.07. But I want to be careful here because when people hear cultural variables, they sometimes just think of, like, a corporate HR training video.
Oh, absolutely. The generic compliance training.
Right. So how does this actually apply to behavioral supervision?
Well, we have to view it clinically. Culturally responsive supervision is really about understanding learning histories.
Okay, break that down.
Culture shapes what we find reinforcing, what we find punishing, and how we interpret the actions of others. The sources highlight that cultural variables encompass a massive spectrum. We're talking age, disability, ethnicity, gender expression.
Immigration status, marital status, national origin.
Exactly. Race, religion, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. To put it in pure behavioral terms, a behavior that is consistently reinforced in one culture might be heavily punished in another.
Okay, give me a tangible example of that in the supervision context, because I think people need to visualize this.
Sure. Consider direct eye contact. Right. In many Western individualized cultures, maintaining firm eye contact with your supervisor is highly reinforced.
Yeah, it's viewed as a sign of confidence, honesty, active listening.
Exactly. But in several Eastern or indigenous cultures, maintaining direct eye contact with an authority figure is historically punished.
Oh, interesting.
It is viewed as defiant or deeply disrespectful. So if you, as a supervisor, do not assess that cultural variable, you might write a goal for a trainee to increase eye contact and assertive communication during feedback sessions.
And you'd be completely oblivious to the fact that you are asking them to violate a deeply ingrained, culturally conditioned rule.
Exactly. Your supervision goal lacks contextual fit, and your supervisory relationship will fracture.
Wow. And the trap there is the supervisor thinking, well, my way is the objective professional standard.
But it's not.
It's just their learning history.
Exactly right.
It is a two-way street. The sources make it clear that assessing cultural variables means the supervisor has to evaluate their own biases, not just the supervisees. You have to analyze your own conditioning.
It is the most uncomfortable, but honestly the most necessary part of the job.
I bet.
You have to look in the mirror and ask, why am I demanding this specific behavior from my trainee? Is it clinically necessary for the client, or is it just what makes me comfortable based on my own cultural background?
That level of self-reflection is rare. So we have skills assessment, we have cultural variables, and that leads us to the third pillar of the triad, the environment.
The environment dictates survival.
Ooh, I like how you phrase that.
It's true. Your goals must be anchored to the supervisee's actual day-to-day job responsibilities, the specific needs of the clients they serve, and the physical and organizational resources they actually have access to.
Right, because shaping a behavior that can't be maintained by the natural environment is just a waste of time.
Absolutely. Think about it. If you have a supervisee working in a well-funded, highly structured autism clinic,
Like with a 1-to-1 staff ratio.
yeah, and a BCBA on-site at all times, their goals might focus on highly nuanced, fine motor skill acquisition programs.
Sure.
But if that same supervisee transfers to an underfunded inner-city public school where they are consulting on a classroom of 30 students with one overwhelmed teacher,
Oh, man. Totally different game.
those fine motor goals are utterly useless. The environmental contingencies have shifted radically.
So what do?
Their goals must pivot to classroom management, group contingencies, and basic safety protocols. If you don't assess the environment, you are training them for a world that doesn't exist.
You know, I want to pause here and play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because I hear this argument all the time from overworked clinical directors. The BACB task list is essentially a giant comprehensive syllabus.
Yes, it outlines everything.
It outlines every single concept the behavior analyst needs to know, from A to I. So from an efficiency standpoint, why can't a supervisor just copy and paste the task list items, turn them into goals, and hand them to every single trainee?
Ah, I see where you're going.
Doesn't that guarantee everyone gets the exact same rigorous education? Standardization seems like it would solve a lot of problems.
I understand the temptation, believe me. But That is a disastrous misconception.
Right.
It is the quickest way to guarantee you produce mediocre clinicians. The task list provides the universe of possible skills, yes, but the application of those skills must be completely individualized.
Okay, let's use a medical analogy. It's like a doctor saying, well, antibiotics, insulin, and blood pressure medication are all scientifically validated treatments.
Right.
So to maintain consistency, I'm going to prescribe the exact same dosage of all three to every patient who walks through the door.
Yes.
Whether it's a 250-pound athlete with a torn ligament or a 100-pound teenager with a cold, it's absurd when you apply it to medicine, but we do it in supervision all the time.
That is a perfect analogy. We vehemently defend the principle of individualization when it comes to our clients.
Right.
We would be appalled if a clinic used the exact same treatment plan for 10 different autistic children.
It would be unethical.
Exactly. We insist on individualization based on unique baseline assessments. Why on earth would we abandon our core scientific principles when we are dealing with adult learners?
It's easier.
But it's lazy. Standardizing goals ignores the immediate environmental contingencies the supervisee faces. It ignores their unique baseline competencies, and it completely bypasses their cultural context.
So what does consistency actually mean then?
When the exam sources talk about consistency in supervision, they mean consistent evaluation methods.
Ah, right.
Like consistently taking data on performance or holding consistent weekly meetings. It does not mean identical goals.
That is such an important distinction. Okay, I want to take all this theory and ground it in a real complex scenario.
Let's do it.
Our source data gives us a fantastic case study involving a BCBA named Omar. Let's build out his profile.
He's a great example.
Omar is intellectually brilliant. He devours the research literature. He can probably explain the nuances of matching law better than most seasoned BCBAs.
The total theory guy.
Exactly. But his entire background is in early intervention, doing discrete trial training with 3-year-olds. Suddenly, he gets a new job at a clinic that handles severe, high-magnitude behavioral challenges.
A completely different environment.
Yeah, we're talking property destruction, severe aggression, teenagers who are much larger than he is. He is eager. But underneath that, he is terrified. He has zero practical experience in this specific environment.
This is where average supervision fails and elite supervision shines.
Walk us through it.
Let's look at how a top-tier supervisor, the sources refer to her as Emily, handles Omar using the triad. An average supervisor would just hand Omar a stack of journal articles on functional communication training for severe behavior.
Which is useless because Omar already knows the theory. He's probably read those exact articles.
Exactly the issue. So Emily doesn't do that. First, she runs the skills assessment. She goes out onto the clinic floor and directly observes Omar in the natural environment.
The in situ assessment.
Right. She watches an interaction where a large client begins displaying precursor behaviors, pacing, clenching fists, the early signs of escalation.
All high stakes.
Very. And Emily observes Omar completely freeze. He knows the protocol in his head, but his motor behavior does not match his verbal behavior.
Right.
The baseline is established. High theoretical knowledge, extremely low practical application under pressure.
So she sees the freeze. If she stops her assessment right there, she might just write a note that says Omar lacks confidence or Omar is incompetent in a crisis.
And that leads to a terrible punitive goal.
Exactly. That's why she has to move to the second pillar, cultural variables.
And this is where the clinical picture totally shifts. Emily sits down with Omar, not to lecture him, but to engage in active listening and understand his learning history.
What does she find out?
Through this, she discovers that Omar comes from a cultural background that heavily prioritizes deference to authority and elders. In his family and community, taking autonomous action in a high-stakes situation without explicit, step-by-step permission from a superior is considered incredibly arrogant and disrespectful.
Wow. That completely recontextualizes the freeze.
It changes everything.
What Emily initially thought as a lack of clinical competence was actually Omar behaving in strict accordance with a deeply ingrained cultural rule.
Yes.
He wasn't freezing because he didn't know what to do. He was waiting for his authority figure, Emily, to grant him permission to intervene.
Exactly. If Emily doesn't uncover that cultural variable, she treats his behavior as a skill deficit rather than a performance issue tied to cultural conditioning.
And that would destroy his confidence.
Utterly. Finally, Emily assesses the environment. The clinic they're in requires immediate, competent crisis response. A severe behavioral episode doesn't pause to let a supervisee ask for permission.
Nope, it sure doesn't.
The environment strictly demands fluency and immediate autonomous action to keep the client and the staff safe.
So we have the full triad. We know his skills, we understand his cultural barriers, and we know the environmental demands. What is the actual clinical solution? How does Emily write a goal that bridges that gap?
The intervention must directly address the specific deficits. The source material highlights that the elite approach here is behavioral skills training, or BST.
A classic.
Emily writes a supervision goal centered on Omar demonstrating fluency in crisis response protocols through BST. She doesn't just talk to him about it.
Right.
First, she provides a clear rationale, explaining why the clinic environment requires immediate action, explicitly giving him the permission his cultural history requires.
That is so smart.
It really is. She provides written and vocal instructions. Then she models the exact physical response to the precursor behaviors.
So she is acting it out.
She is acting it out in a controlled safe room away from the client. Then she has Omar rehearse it.
They role-play the crisis.
Exactly. He practices stepping in, blocking, or redirecting. When he hesitates, she provides immediate, culturally sensitive feedback. She shapes his behavior in a contrived environment until his fluency is high enough to contact the natural contingencies safely. Once he is fluent in roleplay, they move to in vivo observation on the clinic floor.
It is literal shaping. You are setting up contrived opportunities to build the behavior, reinforcing successive approximations before placing the full demand in the natural, high-stakes environment. It's a beautiful application of the science.
It really is when it's done right.
But unfortunately, that is the top 1%. Let's look at how the other 99% mess it up.
Oh, let's talk about the traps.
Yes, our sources outline 3 major clinical traps that we need to dissect. We touched on it earlier, but trap number 1 is the cookie-cutter approach.
We see this illustrated perfectly in a source scenario involving a supervisor named Kevin and a BCBA student named Priya.
Okay, tell us about Priya.
Priya is a lot like Omar. She has great theoretical knowledge but struggles to bridge the gap to practical application. Kevin, her supervisor, decides that the easiest way to handle his large caseload of trainees is to use a standardized template of goals for everyone.
Ah, there it is.
He rationalizes this by claiming he is maintaining consistency based on the BCBA task list.
It sounds so professional when you say it like that. Maintaining consistency. But going back to our doctor analogy, he is just prescribing the exact same dosage of medication to every patient in the waiting room.
And the fallout from this is severe. By standardizing the goals, Kevin completely ignores Priya's individual baseline competencies. The trap here is twofold.
Break it down.
First, you end up with your advanced trainees, your experts being forced to review foundational concepts they mastered years ago.
Like making them redefine positive reinforcement?
Exactly. They become bored, disengaged, and resentful. Second, and far more dangerous, your novices are thrown into advanced analytical goals without the foundational support they actually need.
So they just drown.
They become overwhelmed and make clinical errors. Aligning goals with Priya's unique competencies allows the supervisor to directly address her practical application challenges, facilitating meaningful, rapid progress.
That brings us to trap number 2, which I think is even more insidious than the cookie-cutter approach. Let's call it the supervisor's personal agenda.
Oh, this one is rampant.
Right. This happens when the supervisor isn't standardizing, but is actually just projecting their own favorite hyperfixations onto the trainee. It feels productive to the supervisor, but it completely fails the supervisee.
The source material provides a brilliant scenario for this involving Dr. Lin and her BCBA student, Ben. Ben is an incredibly creative clinician. He excels at designing nuanced, highly effective intervention plans.
A great skill.
But he struggles with data analysis. He can write the plan, but analyzing the trend lines is tough for him. Now, Dr. Lin, his supervisor, has a deep personal interest and expertise in advanced data analysis and statistical tracking.
Oh, she loves her pivot tables.
She loves her pivot tables. The trap here is Dr. Lin selecting supervision goals based primarily on her personal interests rather than Ben's actual job requirements or clinical needs.
It's so unfair.
The text explicitly asks what factor Dr. Lin should not consider when selecting goals, and the definitive answer is the BCBA's personal interest in data analysis.
I get so frustrated on behalf of trainees when I see this. You have a supervisor who is incredibly comfortable in one specific domain, say organizational behavior management or advanced graphing, and they force their supervisee to spend 80% of their supervision hours doing deep dives into OBM literature or writing complex Excel formulas.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Ben's actual environment requires him to build better operational definitions and train RBTs on the floor. But he is stuck in a back office building graphs because his supervisor likes talking about graphs. The supervision has utterly failed him.
It is an egregious violation of Code 4.06, which mandates providing supervision and training that is individualized for each supervisee and their circumstances. Supervision is about the trainee's repertoire, not the supervisor's ego or comfort zone. So true.
You have to be willing to supervise outside of your favorite topics, or you shouldn't be taking on trainees.
And that leads to trap number 3, which ties back to our cultural discussion. Ignoring the cultural context of feedback. What happens when the supervisor tries to correct behavior without assessing those variables?
This is where we see supervisory relationships irreparably break down. Let's imagine a supervisor who prides themselves on being brutally honest.
Oh, boy.
Right. They deliver very blunt, highly direct public feedback to a supervisee on the clinic floor. No, you're doing that prompt completely wrong. Step aside and let me show you.
Yikes.
The supervisor might genuinely think they are just being efficient, transparent, and providing immediate consequence delivery.
But they haven't assessed the supervisee's cultural background.
Precisely the failure. If that supervisee's cultural background views public correction as deeply shameful, a severe loss of face, or direct attack on their honor, that supervisor's feedback does not function as a helpful correction.
No, it functions as positive punishment.
And let's break down the mechanics of positive punishment here for the listener. You have added an aversive stimulus, intense public shame, which will decrease the future frequency of the behavior. But what behavior are you actually decreasing?
You are unintentionally punishing the exact clinical behavior you are trying to shape.
It's completely counterproductive.
The supervisee isn't going to learn the prompting strategy better. Instead, their behavior will shift to avoidance. They will start avoiding the supervisor, they might start hiding data, or they will experience such high anxiety that their clinical performance degrades further.
All because the delivery of the feedback lacked cultural responsiveness.
You've created a totally toxic environment because you assumed your feedback style was a universal good.
Which is a huge mistake.
As Code 1.07 requires, the supervisor must recognize that their preference for blunt public feedback is just a preference. It is a product of their own learning history. It is not an objective scientific standard of good supervision. If your feedback is not actually functioning as reinforcement or effective instruction to shape the supervisee's repertoire, you have to change your delivery.
You must adapt to the learner.
Always.
Always. Okay. We have covered a massive amount of clinical philosophy. Let's pivot and translate every ounce of this into hard, unforgiving exam strategy.
Let's do it.
For the listeners prepping for their boards, this is the Pearson VUE logic you need to master. We are going to run through the if you see this, choose this framework.
Let's start with Scenario A, which focuses on the initial assessment. If you see a question on the exam where a supervisee is struggling to implement a specific clinical protocol, and the options ask for the supervisor's first step.
Choose this. Directly observe the supervisee in the natural environment to assess their current skill level. Do not choose. Review the theoretical literature. Do not choose. Schedule a meeting to discuss the principles, and do not choose assign a training module.
The exam writers want to see if you understand the priority of objective data. Our sources, specifically Mach 3, Question 14, hammer this home. In situ assessment, direct observation in the natural environment is paramount.
It's non-negotiable.
You must establish a baseline of the actual physical behavior before you can do anything else. Discussing it in a conference room does not give you the data you need to set an accurate goal.
Scenario B. If a question asks what factor should not be considered when selecting supervision goals.
Choose this. The supervisor's personal areas of interest or expertise. As we explore deeply with the Dr. Lin and Ben scenario, your choices must always, without exception, be anchored to the supervisee's competencies, their unique cultural needs, and the specific environment of the clients they serve.
It's about them, not you.
The supervisor's favorite topics are completely irrelevant to goal selection.
And we have to give a massive key distractor warning here based on the source material. You will see answers that suggest standardizing goals across all trainees to maintain consistency.
Oh, they love that one.
The exam writers love using this distractor because consistency sounds like a solid, scientific, BACB-approved word. It tricks people every time.
It sounds incredibly appealing to an anxious test taker, but as we've established, consistency in the context of supervision refers to the consistent application of your systems.
Like your evaluation metrics.
Yes, your evaluation metrics, your feedback schedules, your data collection. It emphatically does not mean giving everyone identical goals.
Right.
The principle of individualization is the bedrock of our science, and it trumps the illusion of standardized convenience every single time. If an answer suggests treating all adult learners exactly the same, eliminate it immediately.
Let's bring this entire deep dive home with our clinical power insight. This is the advanced thinking. This is the paradigm shift that separates the people who just barely pass the test from the true master clinicians out in the field.
The highest level takeaway we can extract from task list item I.4 is the realization that supervision IS behavior analysis. Elite clinicians don't simply teach ABA, they actively use ABA to teach.
You are writing a behavior intervention plan for your staff. That is so powerful. We use our science to teach our science.
Exactly. Look at the components of competency-based training. You provide a clear rationale, you provide written and vocal instructions, you model the skill, you have the supervisee rehearse it, you provide immediate, specific feedback.
It's all just behavioral principles.
That entire process is simply the systematic application of shaping, prompting, fading, and differential reinforcement to a professional adult. When you sit down and set a supervision goal based on their baseline skills, their cultural variables, and the specific environmental contingencies they face, you are just conducting a functional assessment.
Wow.
You are manipulating antecedents and consequences to facilitate behavior change.
And if we connect this to the reality of your daily grind, treating your supervisees with the exact same analytical rigor, the exact same data-driven focus, and the exact same cultural humility that you apply to your clients is the defining characteristic of a top-tier clinical director.
It really is.
It is about extending the grace and the precision of our science to the people who are actually on the ground implementing it.
I want to leave you with this final challenge. Tomorrow, when you go into work, take a hard, unvarnished look at the goals you have set for your trainees.
Or, if you are a trainee, look at the goals set for you.
Exactly. Are those goals actively, systematically shaping a master clinician for the specific, messy environment they are in? Or are they just keeping everyone busy with generic checklists to appease an administrator? Demand the science from your supervision.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. www.amethysttherapyservices.com, /info at amethysttherapyservices.com.
If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.